Welcome to Ruin a Bad Guy's Day radio podcast with fraud expert Skip Myers.
This is your guide to fighting fraud and chargebacks.
Learn the best fraud prevention solutions and strategies.
How to enhance your fraud prevention team.
And how to prosecute criminals. Now, here's your host, Skip Myers.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to Ruin a Bad Guy's Day Radio. Hey, I'm Skip Myers, and I'm your host today for Ruin a Bad Guy's Day Radio. Hey, first off, I want to start off and thank everyone who continues to support the program, and especially all of you who keep sending in all those great emails and feedback. I really appreciate it. Hey, we have a great show lined up this week, including a very, very special guest that helps you fight fraudsters through enhanced training and awareness to a better understanding of cybersecurity and internal audit controls. But first, as always, I have some great news and updates involving very stupid criminals. So this just in from ABC 13 KTRK TV in Houston, Texas, busted bumbling burglars butt dial 911 while robbing a local Houston Best Buy store. Unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. Looks like Three Stooges couldn't have scripted this any better. Police say they busted these bumbling burglars after they butt dialed 911 while robbing a local Best Buy just outside of Houston. The 911 call came in around 3 a.m. from a cell phone, police told the news crew, but there was nothing but background noise when the call came in. The police decided to ping the phone and saw that the call was actually coming from a local Best Buy in Sugar Land, which is a Houston suburb, just as the burglar alarm was coming in from that exact same store, the police said. You know, sometimes it's just meant to be to bust the bad guys. How stupid could they be? You had to bring your cell phone, to this robbery. Unbelievable. Anyways, they somehow butt dialed 911, according to the police, and then the PD put everything together and determined that these two incidents were occurring at the same time. So officers were already en route to that alarm call when they got the other 911 call that was butt dialed. You know, I can't imagine the look on those bad guys when the cops pulled up in the parking lot and said, how do they figure this out? Not knowing that one of their buddies butt dialed 911. Unbelievable. So laden with all the stolen goods, the thieves fled in a stolen pickup truck and led the cops on a 40-minute high-speed chase with speeds reaching over 120 miles an hour, according to the news crew. Search revealed laptops and other electronics stashed in the trunk, the police said. 2 of the 3 men were picked up nearby the location of the truck when the other bad guy bailed, and he is still being hunted by police. You know, we love stupid bad guy stories here at Ruin a Bad Guy's Day Radio, and every day when we work together and collaborate and partner, we can really ruin a bad guy's day, especially when they help us by butt dialing 911. So, hey, as promised, Ruin a Bad Guy's Day Radio will be featuring some of the top fraud fighters in the industry in 2019, and today and this week is no exception. So today, I'm especially excited to introduce to you Matt Christensen. Matt's with Audit Lock consultancy and fraudsters.com. Matt is transforming the Anti-Fraud CPE, or continuing education and professional development for fraud fighters. So, hey, Matt, how you doing? I'm so glad you could join us today. How you doing?
Skip, I'm just, your whole story about butt dialing, and the whole time, like, I'm on mute. All right, I hope I'm not laughing too hard.
I was hoping you were laughing. I was laughing. It's hard to control that. I read that story like 6 times preparing for this, and I'm trying to imagine the whole thing. Dude, I don't know. You got to take your phone to, this big crime. You're masterminded, and you I don't know. What are you, Instagramming your friends when you're doing this? It's great.
Oh, man, you can't make it up. I love it. But Skip, thanks so much for having me, man. I'm excited and honored to be here. Oh,
I'm honored too. We built a relationship over the last several months, and we both share a lot of the same ideas and passion for building awareness and creating that higher education level for all those great fraud fighters and fraud practitioners out there, always trying to get a little bit of a leg up on the bad guys. And, one thing I was, pre-podcast review, I just have to ask, how did you come up with the name for your company, especially fraudnotfrog.com? I just love that. That's awesome.
It goes back over a decade ago when I first started telling people that I was a fraud investigator. I would have a series of conversations. I thought I was doing a great job selling what I was doing. Usually it was against, it was strangers or people sitting next to me on a plane, and I'd go into this elaborate discussion of how I prevent and detect fraud. And finally they'd look at me with this puzzled face like, okay, I understand prevention, but how many frogs are there in businesses that you go into? And so it just became one of those things where I'm like, okay, it is fraud, not frog. So that was kind of the main thing. That's the tagline for the website.
That's hilarious.
Prevent and detect fraud, not frogs.
So you're not into amphibians as others would think.
Herpetology never was a strength of mine. So no.
That's awesome. Hey, so you got an extensive background and a lot of great credentials. Can you tell our listeners a little bit more about your background and how you got into this business?
Yeah, happy to. And I don't claim to know everything there is about it, but I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of good experiences. It all started with trying to just break into the industry. I literally applied for over 50 jobs and I could not get in. Everyone required experience to get experience, and I just couldn't get in. And so finally I found a company that was willing to take me on as a cybersecurity consultant, which I thought was a little ironic because I had no experience, but that was the title, as junior cybersecurity consultant. An amazing company that gave me amazing opportunities to travel the world and find and actually build a fraud program. So I was able to do that. We did it for large Fortune companies. And then throughout my career, I've been able to help establish and build and mature other fraud and cybersecurity programs.
That's awesome. Yeah, you talked about some of the first steps you took, but what were some of the things that you think that really got you that first job to get started, in cybersecurity and cybersecurity consulting?
So it was one of those situations where I had to go above and beyond. I was competing against, hundreds of other people in my state at the same time for the few jobs that existed. Jobs in cybersecurity then they didn't flourish like they do now. In fact, there's more demand than inventory now, today, 10, 12 years later. So the few that actually happened, you had to fight for. And I went to an after hours mentoring event, the things that most college students are like, yeah, I'm not going to that. I listened to this speech that, to be honest, to this day was probably one of the worst presentations I'd ever been to. But afterwards, I went to the presenter and just asked the question, how can I break into this industry? Do you know of any opportunities? And while he didn't give the most stellar presentation, he was connected. And he's like, oh, I know of an internship. Let me send you over to that. Give me your resume. And literally within 3 weeks, I had a job. So after trying to do what everyone else had done, apply, not even get an interview, just reject letter after reject letter, it took me getting out of my shell and just, approaching someone and just saying, this is what I'm looking for. Do you know of an opportunity? And literally within 3 weeks, I had the job.
Yeah, I think that's always the difference maker. I mean, resumes get lost in the crowd. You have to show people that you're unique, that Matt has a different look on a different perspective of looking at things from not always a traditional perspective. And when you do that, you set yourself apart from everybody else that's, doing this job like they just read it out of a book.
Yeah. And even right after I got the job, I quickly realized on this, I think there were 7 or 8 of us on that team that was supported, over 100,000 employees. I realized quick, I've got to differentiate myself or I'm going to die. I mean,
Exactly.
I literally, the best thing I could do is bring them coffee and ramen noodles. And so I said, how can I add a skill set or grow a skill set that can make me valuable to this company to where they're going to want to keep me and move it from an internship to a full-time gig, which is exactly what happened after just a few months. And so, I took the initiative to find something that what I believed didn't exist at the time, find a skill set. And that's where I researched this certification called a certified fraud examiner. Mm-hmm. And, I scrolled through it and I'm like, man, this is exactly what I wanted to do. I don't know if you knew this, but I actually wanted to do law enforcement and then go into federal. And my life didn't take me down that course, which I'm super grateful. Things wouldn't have turned out the way that they did had I gone that route. But I always wanted to be kind of in that investigative space. So I found this this designation called Certified Fraud Examiners, ACFE.com, and just said, this is exactly what I need personally, but more than that, what this company needs to help further and mature their cyber program. So I took it to my boss, the chief information security officer at the time, and I said, hey, what do you think about this? And he took a chance on me, and I'm grateful to that to this day. He took a chance on me, realized that we could use that to further the business, and we actually built a process that landed us multi-million dollar contracts. It was a really cool thing.
It's awesome. Hey, everyone. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you're just now tuning in, we're speaking with Matt Christensen with Audit Lock Consultancy and FrogNotFraud.com. And right now, if you're just tuning in, we're really diving deep into how Matt is really transforming anti-fraud CPEs, or continuing education and professional development for fraud fighters. And it's so important. And, Matt, this is a great conversation because a lot of us in this industry, so often we get caught up in just focusing on investigations and the fraud losses and really bad guys, but really staying ahead of the bad guys really comes from continual education. I mean, really building those skills to fight the bad guys. So what do you really think? How can we leverage some existing skill sets for those who are really looking to break into this anti-fraud industry? What's some of the things you think are most important?
I appreciate that question. It is a tough industry to break into, but it's an even tougher industry to stay competitive. So it's not one, and that's why I love it so much. It's so dynamic. It's so fluid. You can't just rest on prior experience. You always have to be getting better at what you do. Investigators that have 30 and 40 years experience, they have a ton of value, but what I'm seeing is they're lacking in how fraud is committed now today and how it will be committed in the future. And so that's one of my main missions, is helping people get quality education that's modern, that's relevant, that's not the boring slide deck that everyone just wants to die listening to. But it's
bullet points.
Yeah. It's like, give me the deck, I can read the deck, but
yes,
what I can't read is your experience. So I focus on finding people who are passionate about sharing their experience. The truth is, how fraud was committed 30 and 40 years ago doesn't vary too much now. It's the same frauds happening, they're just doing it a different way. And so you have to detect it a different way. So, man, anyone that I can talk to that's got 30, 40 years experience, even 20, I gravitate to them, and I try and pull from them their experience, and then get them to share it in a way that perhaps is different than they've done before. Like I said, not through a PowerPoint, but through a live video presentation, or through an online training that is interactive, through group forums, through Facebook groups. Just the ability in live sessions, of course, but just to get them in front of other investigators, other people who are trying to sharpen their craft. It's just been an absolute passion of mine. I think the other question you asked is, how do you break into this industry, and how do you use your existing skill sets? So I'm a huge believer, you don't have to come from military or law enforcement to be a fraud examiner. Now, if you have that, you do have an upper edge in some ways. But I've talked to people who have been fast food workers, construction workers, an oceanographer. I talked to someone who's an oceanographer that ended up becoming, a fraud examiner.
They can dive deep into fraud.
Dude. Man, you can't plan this.
Yeah, I know.
No, but it's true. In every industry, of every company, of every size, you're going to find people who will steal from you. And that's the message that I'm here to advocate, that I'm partnering with amazing people and peers and colleagues like you, is that if we just talk about it, we can grow that expansion. We can let people know, man, this could happen in my business. Just a week or two ago, I was talking with a company doing some consulting work. They a small firm. They'd never heard of the term business email compromise. Now, I know your listeners are smart. They know what BEC is, but we talked through it. We found exactly what had happened. They had an email compromised. They had another email set up as an auto forward, and the bad guy took advantage of that, learned exactly when Payroll Wednesday was, and right before Payroll Wednesday said, hey, boss, I need you to change the account number, route all the payroll to this number, and $80,000 later, they were down.
That's awesome.
So that's just one of the things. You're right, though. I am passionate about not taking the standard training approach to get continuing education. It should be fun.
You're absolutely right. And I was really listening hard at what you're saying about, people that have former law enforcement experience, me included. But, I've been in this line of work for a long time. If you don't stay current, if you don't evolve your mindset and really get ahead of the bad guys through education and training, going to conferences, networking and partnering and, breaking down silos and trying to learn as much as you can, you're going to be left behind, and the other point you have, which I really, really like, is that you don't have to be a former investigator, law enforcement, military, or whatever to really do this work. And, we're talking about situational skills and critical thinking and really being able to understand suspicious transactions if it's online, and really having that mindset to identify trends and commonalities and how they integrate or subjugate your operational processes that are causing the loss. So it's you got to have a rounded mindset and background to do this job.
You do, and beyond not being complacent and beyond always wanting to grow and learn, you do have to have that mindset of really wanting to dig in. There's been very little fraud that I've ever found or I've ever detected by just getting lucky. I mean, it does happen to it. I'm sure over your career, there have been those cases. Well, like the one that you mentioned at the get-go, like law enforcement got real lucky that the guys, they decided to butt dial and give their exact triangulated position of where they are. It does happen, but in my experience, it's few and far between. You really have to be willing to ask why,
right,
and to dig into it, and to not form your own theory and just go for it, but
exactly,
to really be objective, independent in that thinking, so that you don't just become biased and here's exactly what happened. And usually when that happens, you end up being wrong.
That's exactly right. And I'm still old school, taught by some of my mentors long ago, but the easy way out is follow the obvious evidence, follow the obvious bad guy who committed this particular crime. That's the easy way out. The harder way, and sometimes in the end, more rewarding way, is you just follow the trail of evidence and let it take you no matter where it takes you. And sometimes it takes you in directions, as you know, to places you've never been before. So that suspect you thought of at first was your target. It's not even close, because you did the honest thing by following the evidence and let it take you wherever it may go.
Yeah. There was a number of years ago, I was overseas doing an investigation. We thought technically we could prove how what was occurring. And this was a big fraud, definitely in the millions. And the fact is, the technology couldn't prove it, but it came down to honing in on the right people to ask the right questions to. It's something that should have been way early on. It just got skipped, and they put too much emphasis. We put too much emphasis on letting technology prove how it happened. Talk about going old school. Man, we pulled out a conference room and we started interviewing, and it was through the interviewing that we then were able to find who was, actually allegedly, but then proven to have committed the fraud. And so, yeah, I love what you're saying. You have to really just chase it and follow it. And that's, in my experience, that's been where you get the best results.
Yeah, as far as I know, there is not a fraud solution in a box, a cybersecurity package that can sit down with suspects or even internal employees to really get down to the root cause of a problem. That's all data driven, and it's still based on human interaction to analyze that data. But the real meat of an investigation really starts, like this, what you said, sitting down and talking to people. I love that. So let's go on a little bit more. So, we know that cybersecurity controls and internal audit controls are not mutually exclusive, and rather they do support each other. But a lot of times we treat these two lines of businesses separately when they do come together. And wow, how much more powerful could it be if we converge those two mindsets together, break down the silos and increase collaboration? Be wonderful to see what really could be possible if more organizations did that.
Yeah. And again, something, Skip, I'm super passionate about. Through my career and through consulting, I've been able to work with very large organizations. And one of the more obvious things that I've seen is like you said, the silos that occur, the stovepipes that occur, where independent departments can find a subset of their own fraud, but they not utilizing the same tools are ignoring other fraud that's committed. So, in cybersecurity, organizations may really be really good at preventing and detecting hackers or or external threats. Internal audit may work with other business units or lines of business that are good at finding timekeeping theft or things like that. But rare is it that I've seen, more in consulting than any prior employer, but rare is it that I've seen these departments collaborate to join forces to say, here's technologies we have, let's work together and let's partner together. The fact is, I think while cybercrime is a huge threat to most large organizations, the insider threats, malicious and accidentals, are probably greater and more common, and maybe don't equate to the same amount that a data breach would in terms of dollars or impact, but frequency, insider threats by far are more common. You have thousands of employees, you will have a subset of them that will steal from you. I always say, if you have humans, you have fraud. And so if you can work together and get leadership to support saying, okay, we're not going to go out there and campaign that all our employees are bad people and dishonest and are going to steal from us. But if they just accept that there will be a small subset, regardless of the background checks, regardless of the internal controls, that will take advantage of situations and will ultimately steal.
Exactly.
And so if you can get these, it's usually the department heads that struggle with, no, that's my territory, or no, we just don't get into that. That's this other department's responsibility. But if you can get together, and this is what I've done in prior organizations, and build kind of a responsibility chart, a RACI, that says, here's who's responsible, here's who's accountable, here's who needs to stay informed. If you can build that chart, then you line up all the different departments that are involved. You're going to have IT, you're going to have internal audit, you're going to have legal. There absolutely will have to be HR. There might be sub departments as well that are responsible for all playing a part in that internal fraud program. And so that's one thing that I advocate. And anyway, I'm always looking for organizations that have done that to learn from, see how they've been successful, and see where they maybe could do better.
You're absolutely right. Bringing all those departments together, sometimes in one room, a lot of us and others sometimes don't always realize, people from those other departments, we have complementary skill sets and we don't even realize it. There's other people out there that have critical thinking skills and situational skills. Heck, they may even have investigative skills and that ability to connect the dots, and advocates that really see the bigger picture for the company or your organization. And they really want to get out of their own silo and work with people just like you. So unless you go talk to them, you don't know that they actually exist, or actually they have the mindset to actually be a part of that fraud prevention team. And that's how you build value for yourself and your department, I believe, for the whole organization.
There's a lot of statistics that say that organizations lose close to 5% of their revenues to fraud. And I haven't seen that in the organizations that I've been fortunate of working for. It's been much, much, much smaller. But say it's only 1%. I mean, even if you have 1% loss in your large company, that's a big deal. Even if you're a small company, 1% can be a significant hit. That could put you out of business if you don't have enough capital to come up with the loss. And so, I think it's one of those things that you have to be aware of, that fraud's going to happen. Now, how can we do something about it? What I've seen too often, Skip, is especially in smaller businesses, you've got guys that go, I've never had that happen to me. I've had the same staff for 15 years. No way would it ever happen. And they could be right. They could go their whole career, but their peer or, a partner or someone else that they know, it's going to happen to them. And that is the number one thing that I hear people say is, I never once in a million years would have thought this could have happened in my business.
Exactly.
So regardless of your size, you've got to, as a business owner, as leaders in a business, you have to be willing to accept that there will be people in your company that make bad decisions, whether they're good people that had good intentions that just got in a bind and made a bad choice, or whether they deliberately work their way into your organization to then take advantage of an opportunity and steal something from you. I do feel like in more cases than not, Skip, it's the former. It's the person who doesn't have a criminal background. It's the person whose kid gets diagnosed with a medical treatment. They're looking for $1,000 to cover and they want to pay it back. And then it generally snowballs from there. That seems to be more of what I see than like a malicious insider. But regardless, to get back, you've got to get leadership aligned and to agree, and then you have to formalize it. It is not an easy task by any means.
No,
to get leadership to align and agree and to build policy, guidelines, procedures, SOWs, or SOPs, standard operating procedures. You have to get leadership to line at the top to say, this is a priority. We're going to support it. It's going to take time to build and mature, but we're committed to it. And it says a lot to your employee base when you say, we're committed to this.
Exactly. We say a lot on this radio show that you should be the voice of your own initiative. I mean, if you see something going on, it's your obligation to say something about it or work with those in your organization or even outside your organization to make it better. I mean, if you don't, the consequences could be severe. And, Matt, you're exactly right. Some of the biggest cases I've ever had in my 30 years doing this line of work are usually from those people you least expect. And you're right, there's a mindset out there, well, it's never happened to me. We do criminal backgrounds, no one steals from us. Or we got all these extra controls and fraud solution providers on our back end. Bad guys can't penetrate our network. That lackadaisical mindset will surely get you into deep trouble, and the bad guys will always find a way to outsmart you.
They will. One of my favorite movies, Skip, is Robert Redford's show, late 80s, Sneakers. I don't know if that's one you're familiar with, but that one's honestly, I can't remember. I was 8 or 9 when I saw it for the first time, and I thought that's my career there. And the premise is they get paid to break in to companies, to show companies how
Sure.
Other people would break in, right? Find those vulnerabilities that you just mentioned. It doesn't matter how many controls you have. There generally is another way to break in. So it really does come back to, do you have a workforce that's willing to speak up when they see something that doesn't look right? Because chances are you're going to have someone evade an administrative control, a technical control, surveillance. You're going to have people that can get around that. So at the end of the day, it will, in many cases, depend on, do you have a workforce that's willing to say something when they see something? And we do say that a lot in our community, right? Say something, see something, but that's the truth. The key that I think most businesses miss is they implement a fraud hotline and they move on and they don't get any calls.
They don't get any calls. Right.
And then they get blindsided and say, well, what happened? We had a hotline. Why didn't our employees call? And the differentiator there of organizations that get employees to call versus ones that just implement a hotline as a checkbox is they instill in the employees the trust that they need to make that call. I've talked to hundreds of whistleblowers, hundreds of people who have been the first person to make that call. And every time there's a common thread, there's a common denominator, and that was, I really didn't want to, I felt obligated to. And at that point that they felt obligated, the only thing that allowed them to make that call was that they felt safe. They felt that leadership would actually take action on it. And they removed that fear of, am I going to be able to stay anonymous or not? Mm-hmm. And can I speak up without having retaliation? So if leaders can do that, if they can implement an approach, it doesn't have to be a hotline. It could be, send an anonymous email, or, there's a million ways you can get tips while providing anonymity. And that's my biggest thing is leaders have to find a way to tell their employee base, we care about what you see. We trust you. If you ever see anything that looks bad or suspicious, or you're just questioning it, here's how you contact us. If you want to remain anonymous, here's how you do it. They've got to put that trust in people or they're going to lose every time.
Exactly. And that's where this training and awareness and ongoing education is so important, because so often, you said it just perfectly, department implements a fraud hotline. We checked off the box. Hey, boss, we're all good. Our employees can call if they see something wrong, but never analyze, well, hey, Skip, how many calls we getting in last month? We didn't get any calls. Not diving into, well, why aren't you getting any calls? That, to your point, that there's other issues within that organization that have not created that environment where the employees feel like, they can trust the organization to phone in that call, or feel like they won't be, sought after as the whistleblower for highlighting something that's going wrong within the organization. So there's other things in play, but unless you have that training, awareness, and sharing ideas with other departments, that fraud hotline will never get a call.
Yeah. I've talked to a number of organizations before where that is a key indicator that I'll ask them is, how many calls have you had in the last 6 months? And too often I hear, we haven't had calls in 6 years. So yeah, there is that awareness factor. And, Skip, it's a hard thing to do. It's so easy to say, implement a hotline, let people know they're safe, and then go back to work. That is a hard thing to do. That does take training. It does take expertise. Think about a young startup company that's got 150 employees. Chances are, if they have an HR department, there's one person, and it's probably the CEO. When you have a situation like that, you can really ruin culture and really encourage distrust among your employee base if you just throw out a tip line and say, we're going to catch you if you steal from us. That's not what it is. So it does take the right approach to do it the right way. And so does training your employees. And that's one thing that we focus on at fraudnotfrog.com is, how can we provide quality training to people that will make a difference, not just give them, kind of like checking a box to having a tip line. We don't just provide training that checks a box so you get your CE credit. In fact, one of the things that we look for when we do a live webinar, or when we launch an online course, or we do a live training, is, what's the feedback that we're getting? Are people saying and asking, when's your next event? When can we sign up? And that gauges how we're doing. If we aren't getting that, then maybe we aren't giving the best training, which we've done before, just to be candid. But when we get feedback like, man, can you bring that person back, or can you deep dive and do one step further in your next course or whatever? If we're getting that type of feedback, now we know we're hitting the mark, and we're offering something that you just can't get elsewhere.
Awesome. That's great news. Matt, I know you're so passionate about changing the way we get that CPE training, that professional development training, and credit for it. That training should be fun, and, as you said before, entertaining, and it should, last a long time. It should have an impact, months and years down the road, and what's so hard is really developing a training program that sticks. And I love what you said on your website, that there is a better way to do traditional training, and that's what you're relentless to change, and that you're doing it right now. But what other ways, how are you trying to really do this and provide a greater vision on how we're getting training for all these great fraud practitioners out there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Skip. And honestly, that's the make or break for our company. I feel like we can be different in a number of ways. First is getting quality speakers, people who have quality experience. I'm perfectly comfortable if the person isn't the best presenter if the content's there, right? I think people care less about, he's got a monotone voice, or he seems dry. If the content's good and it's teaching them how to be a better fraud investigator or a fraud examiner or internal auditor, they're going to stick around and they're going to want more. And so I do look for engaging people, but I also find people who have relevant experience. These aren't theoretical discussions on how fraud could be found. It's real discussions on how fraud actually was found. Another way, Skip, is we focus on prevention. It's so much less expensive if you can prevent the fraud than having to actually go through the loss, investigating it, implementing more controls to then have it happen again. So prevention is one of the key components that we focus on.
Good point.
And another way, Skip, is we don't believe in the traditional way of receiving online education. We take it a number of steps further. For example, we offer online courses where people can come and take it at their pace. If they're it's train while you're on the train. It's another one of our sayings. They can be on their mobile phone listening. They can view video. They can stop. They can pause. If they're driving, they can just do audio only. They're getting trained while they're going home. That's one of the things that I enjoy doing the most is on a commute. I enjoy furthering my knowledge. And so I'll pop on a podcast like yours, or download some CE or CPE content and listen to that while I drive. You have to cater to how people are wanting to learn today. A number of people will comment to us that they'll take trainings while they're at the gym.
Right.
Now, that wouldn't be my thing. I need a release. I need no music or a very specific music to work out to. But for some people, that's their release. And so we've made it very mobile friendly. And then at the end of it, we'll issue a quiz or something to certify that they've listened to, and then provide to them the opportunity to engage and interact with the presenter or with us give us that feedback. Let us know what they need more of. Engage directly with the presenters so that they can say, hey, I want to bring you into our company. So it's just, that's the approach that we're taking. We're not just what you see on our website, and it's being developed more and more every day, more and more content was being added. But what you're seeing and what you will see is not what you can find elsewhere. It's not expensive CPE that you just end up multitasking during the entire training.
No, that's great news.
It's CPE that if you are multitasking, you're going to stop what you're doing and you're going to actually engage and watch and listen and take notes and want to come back time after time to listen to again.
That is so important. And you're right. A lot of our listeners here on Runa Bad Guys Day Radio tell me all the time the best time that they like to listen to this podcast is their commute on the way into work. They're maximizing every minute of the day, so they're trying to get a little bit further ahead with some of that education and hints from people just like you. But that commute, why waste your commute listening to Britney Spears? I mean, listen to Matt or Runa Bad Guys Day Radio. I mean, for God's sake, that's great stuff. So unless you, well, of course, a lot of people like Britney Spears. But
yeah. If she's listening, this isn't a personal attack against
that's right.
you.
I'm sure she's probably a good fraud fighter somewhere. Hey, Matt. Hey, so thanks so much. You know, those of you who've been listening, we've been talking to Matt Christensen with Audit Lock Consultancy and notfraud.com. He's transforming the Anti-Fraud CPE and continuing education program and personal development for fraud fighters. You know, Matt, it's been great talking fraud with you and training and personal development with you today. Do you have any final thoughts or takeaways for our listeners?
I think the takeaways would be, if you're listening to this show, you likely already are someone like Skip and I, you want to just be better, right? And the hope is that through this radio show, through the podcast, through Skip and I's websites, hopefully you're able to look at it and say, okay, that's one takeaway I got. Now I'm going to go actually do something about it. So my takeaway is hopefully your listeners are able to grab even one thing from the show to then make them better, or one thing from this show to make someone else better. And that's the key. That's how we're going to win against these bad guys is exactly. Collaborating, is working together, not being so holding it to the vest, right? Right. Selfishly progressing in your career while not selfishly help others progress in their career. Hopefully that alone would be it. But, you know, this is one of the best industries to be in, regardless of your background. If you're listening to this while you're driving a truck or working fast food or on the construction site or on a ship somewhere, and you're really anxious to change your career to go a different path, check out Fraud Examination. Find the resources, acfe.com. You know, Skip and I, we don't receive any type of compensation. We don't have formal affiliations with things like that. Look at becoming a PI in your area. Maybe that's your thing. But look at this as an opportunity to say, if you're looking for career change or you want to further your career, this is a great space to be in. And, you know, podcasts like Skip's, podcasts like mine, Fraud Not Frog, you're going to find lots of people who are willing to share what they know and help you just leapfrog into your career. You don't have to get 10 years of experience before you could land a first client. So that would be my takeaway, Skip, is to encourage your listeners to continue learning, continue getting better at their craft, and especially helping other people get better as well.
Matt, thank you so much. You know, a takeaway too, listening to you today has been a pleasure. You know, finding those mentors like yourself or surrounding yourself with, you know, like-minded thinking people that can help further your career, further your knowledge and background, so we can all fight the bad guys at a much higher level. If you don't attend conferences in your industry of cybersecurity, fraud prevention, you know, whatever it may be, you know, get with your boss or, you know, budget for those conferences. You know, I can't recommend enough the time that you can go to those conferences and network with people just like Matt, to learn a little bit more about the industry, find out a little bit more about that personal development and training that is so important to take your knowledge and abilities to the next level to ruin a bad guy's day. And at any time, feel free to contact Matt or I at any time for additional advice. So Matt, thanks again so much for your time and great advice. And hey, everyone, I'll have all of Matt's contact information. Fraud, see, it's a tongue twister, right? It's frog, not fraud. I said this 100 times, right? I rehearsed this. Fraudnotfraud.com. What a great site, great information, all kinds of training and other white paper and blog information there for you guys to really develop your knowledge and background on how to fight fraudsters. So all this information and contact information for Matt. As always, I'll listen to podcast notes with links to his website. Matt Christensen is on LinkedIn. Great way to contact him there and develop, a bigger network with like-minded people. So as always, everyone, I can't thank you enough. Please subscribe to and like Runa Bad Guys Day Radio on Apple iTunes, YouTube, Spotify, and other free download services. We really appreciate your feedback and continued support. Hey, thanks again, and stay tuned for another episode from Runa Bad Guys Day Radio. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening to Ruin a Bad Guy's Day radio podcast with Skip Myers.
If you liked our show, please tell your friends and colleagues.
You can learn more about us at ruinabadguysday.com or visit us on Twitter and Facebook at Ruin a Bad Guy's Day.
Join us for another episode of Ruin a Bad Guy's Day radio podcast.
The information provided in Ruin a Bad Guy's Day radio podcast is for informational purposes only. It should not be considered legal or financial advice. You should consult with legal counsel or other professionals to determine what may be best for your individual or organizational needs.